Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the grand antiseptic-smelling office was thick with unspoken accusations, a heavy blanket of tension that seemed to muffle even the distant, reassuring hum of Genoa City's traffic far below. Jill Abbott, her posture rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the mahogany desk, felt the foundations of her world, so carefully constructed and fiercely defended, begin to crack and splinter. It was a feeling she despised, a vulnerability she had spent a lifetime armoring herself against. Across from her, wearing an expression of such smug, self-satisfied triumph it made her stomach clench, was Jack Abbott, her stepson, a man who was a constant, maddening reminder of a past she could never fully escape. The source of this seismic shift in the room's atmosphere lay not in a shouted threat or a financial disclosure, but in three simple, yet devastating, secrets that Jack had just calmly laid before her, not as his own transgressions, but as sins he had meticulously pinned on her son, Billy Abbott. The air wasn't just thick, it was poisoned, each of Jack's words a drop of toxin designed to corrupt the one pure, unshakable thing in Jill's life, her love for her boy. She could see the entire malicious architecture of his plan now, a blueprint of betrayal designed to make Billy look like the family's turncoat, the weak link, the traitor whispering Abbott confidences to the wrong ears. The first secret Jack detailed was the leak of a sensitive merger discussion to Newman Enterprises. Jill knew with a mother's primal certainty that Billy had been in the room when that information was discussed, but she also knew he had been vehemently, almost naively, loyal to the family company in recent months, trying so hard to prove himself after so many stumbles. Jack, however, presented a fabricated timeline, a doctored email trail that placed Billy at the scene of the crime with a motive of misplaced revenge against his brother. The second secret was more personal, more insidious, the revelation of a private, long-buried health scare concerning John Abbott, their late patriarch and the man whose memory still loomed large over the family. It was a matter of deep family shame and protectiveness for Jill, a chapter she believed was closed forever. Jack claimed that Billy, in a drunken, bitter rant at the society, had let this intimate detail slip to a reporter. Jill's mind raced, picturing her son, so often his own worst enemy, vulnerable and loose-lipped. But the image wouldn't coalesce with the man Billy had been trying so hard to become. The third and final secret was the masterstroke, the one that struck at the very heart of Jill's own power within the company, the details of her secret bid to acquire a rival fashion house, a deal she had been cultivating in the shadows for months, a deal that would have solidified her legacy. Its collapse had been a bewildering, costly blow. And now Jack was sitting there, his voice dripping with faux disappointment, explaining how his internal investigation had uncovered incontrovertible evidence that Billy, seeking to curry favor with another executive, had traded that information like a common commodity. 3 secrets, 3 betrayals, each one painting a portrait of Billy as an unreliable, duplicitous, and deeply damaged individual. Jill's initial reaction was a cold, spreading numbness, a defense mechanism against the sheer, scalding heat of the implications. This wasn't just an attack on Billy, it was an attack on her. It was a message, crafted in Jack's particular brand of corporate cruelty, that her line, her blood, was flawed and untrustworthy, a cancer within the Abbott dynasty that needed to be isolated and excised. She could see the future Jack was crafting with his lies. Billy, ostracized and disbelieved, his hard-won sobriety and fragile confidence shattered, herself, sidelined and pitted as the mother who couldn't control her wayward son. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a simmering volcanic rage. It wasn't just anger. It was a righteous, maternal fury, a force of nature that had been building for decades, through every slight, every condescending remark, every time Jack had looked at her and Billy as if they were interlopers in the hallowed halls of the Abbott mansion. Her thoughts were a frantic, protective whirlwind. She remembered Billy as a little boy, his scraped knees and earnest promises, his desperate desire for approval from a family that always seemed to hold him at arm's length. She remembered his struggles, his failures, yes, but also his resilience, the core of decency that she, and perhaps only she, could always see burning within him, even at his lowest points. And she knew with every fiber of her being that this calculated, cold-hearted character assassination was a line Billy would not have crossed. He was impulsive, he was passionate, he could be spectacularly foolish, but he was not a snake. He did not operate in the shadows with such precision. That was Jack's domain. Jack, who had learned at the knee of his father and the Machiavellian Catherine Chancellor, who saw the world as a chessboard and people as pawns to be sacrificed for a greater strategy. The realization crystallized in her mind, cold and sharp as a diamond. This was not about punishing a leak. This was about power. Billy had been gaining ground, earning respect, becoming a genuine threat to Jack's unchallenged authority. This was Jack's way of removing a rival, of reasserting his dominance, and of delivering the most profound possible wound to Jill herself. He was using her love for her son as a weapon against her, and in doing so he was defiling that very love. The room seemed to shrink, the expensive artwork and plush carpets fading into a blur. All Jill could see was Jack's face, that mask of feigned sorrow and paternal disappointment, a mask she now wanted to claw from his skull. Her breath hitched, not in sorrow but in pure, undiluted fury. The air left her lungs in a sharp, silent gasp. Every instinct, every primal, non-corporate, non-socially acceptable impulse she had ever suppressed in her climb from the bottom to the top, surged to the fore. This was beyond boardrooms and stock options. This was tribal. This was a mother lion defending her cub against a predator who wore the skin of family. Her body moved before her conscious mind could register the action, a physical manifestation of the emotional cataclysm erupting within her. The weight of her body shifted forward, her arm drawing back not in a wild, flailing swing, but with a terrifying, controlled precision. The sound, when her open palm connected with his cheek, was not a loud, dramatic crack, but a solid, wet, profoundly intimate thwack that seemed to suck all the sound from the room. It was a sound of finality, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence of betrayal. The force of the blow was substantial, born of a lifetime of pent-up frustrations and a love so fierce it could manifest as violence. Jack's head snapped to the side, a stark, almost cinematic motion. A livid hand-shaped bloom of red immediately began to spread across his cheek, a perfect stinging testament to her wrath. For a single suspended moment, there was absolute silence. The hum of the city vanished. The only thing that existed was the space between them, now charged with the aftershock of the physical violation. Jack remained frozen, his body still angled away from her, his eyes wide with a mixture of sheer, unadulterated shock and a dawning furious humiliation. He, Jack Abbott, the patriarch, the titan of industry, had been slapped. Not in a dark alley, but in his own office by his stepmother. The sheer audacity, the primal disrespect of it, seemed to short-circuit his usual glib composure. He slowly, deliberately, raised a hand to his stinging cheek, his fingers gingerly probing the heated skin, as if to confirm the reality of what had just happened. The shock in his eyes began to curdle into something darker, something venomous and dangerous. Then the spell broke. Jill, her hand throbbing with a pain she welcomed, dropped her arm to her side. Her chest was heaving, not with exertion, but with the sheer, overwhelming force of her emotions. The rage was still there, a white-hot core, but it was now mingled with a terrifying clarity. There was no taking it back. The line had not just been crossed, it had been obliterated. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice a low, ragged tremor, so full of venom it seemed to sizzle in the air. "How dare you look at me with your lying eyes and try to destroy my son?" The whisper gained strength, rising in volume and intensity with each word. "You think you're so clever, Jack. You think you can play your games with people's lives, with their reputations, with a mother's love for her child, and just walk away unscathed? You think you can frame Billy, my Billy, for your own petty power-hungry schemes and I would just stand here and take it?" She took a step closer, her eyes blazing into his, ignoring the furious, stunned expression on his face. "I have fought my entire life for my place at this table. I have endured more from this family than you could ever comprehend. I have been looked down upon, dismissed, and underestimated since the day I first set foot in this town. But you listen to me and you listen well. You have never ever underestimated me as badly as you have today." Her finger, trembling with adrenaline, jabbed towards him. "I see you, Jack. I see the pathetic, frightened little man inside who is so terrified of losing his throne that he would sink to this. You didn't just attack Billy. You declared war on me. And that, you arrogant fool, is a war you will not win. The promise in her words was absolute. A vow etched in stone and sealed with the sting still present on his face. This was no longer a corporate dispute. It was a blood feud, and Jill had just drawn first blood in the most visceral way possible. Jack finally found his voice, though it was tight and strained, a far cry from his usual smooth baritone. He lowered his hand from his cheek, his own anger beginning to boil over, the humiliation fueling it like gasoline on a fire. "You've lost your mind," he spat, the words clipped and harsh. "Look at you. You're hysterical. You just assaulted me. Do you have any idea what the consequences of this will be? I could have you charged. I could have you removed from the board so fast it would make your head spin." He was trying to regain control, to retreat to the high ground of legality and corporate procedure, but the red mark on his face betrayed him, making him look less like a CEO and more like a chastised schoolboy. "This is exactly the kind of irrational, emotional behavior that proves my point about the instability in your branch of this family. Billy's recklessness clearly comes from somewhere." The insult was deliberate, a desperate attempt to wound her back, to re-establish dominance. But it was a feeble effort. The power in the room had irrevocably shifted. The physical act had shattered the illusion of civilized conflict. Jill let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor whatsoever. It was a sound of pure contempt. "Go ahead, Jack. Call security. Call the police. Have me dragged out of here in handcuffs," she challenged, her voice dangerously calm now, the tremor gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "Let the whole world see the footage. Let them see the moment the great Jack Abbott pushed his stepmother to the brink by falsely accusing her son of being a traitor. Let the media have a field day with that. I wonder what the shareholders would think of a leader who provokes such irrational, emotional responses." She was using his own words against him, twisting them into a weapon. She took a step back, her eyes sweeping over him with a look of utter disdain, as if he were something she had just scraped off her shoe. "This isn't about boardrooms and bylaws anymore. You made sure of that the second you decided to use my child as a pawn. This is personal. And I promise you by the time I'm finished, you will understand the true cost of crossing Jill Foster Abbott." With that she turned, her posture once again ramrod straight, and walked towards the door. Her heels clicked decisively on the polished floor, each step a definitive beat in the new, hostile rhythm of their relationship. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The message had been delivered, not with a lawyer's letter or a boardroom motion, but with the raw, stinging impact of her hand on his face. The war for the soul of the Abbott family, for Billy's future, and for Jill's own legacy, had officially begun, and its opening salvo was a slap that would echo through the halls of Jabot and the mansions of Genoa City for a long, long time to come. The aftermath of the slap was not a quiet one. It was a shockwave that radiated outwards from the epicenter of Jack's office, distorting realities and reshaping alliances in its path. Jack, left alone in the sudden, ringing silence, first grappled with the sheer, stupefying humiliation. The sting on his cheek was a persistent, mocking reminder that his carefully constructed world of verbal sparring and strategic maneuvering had been violently breached. His initial threat to have Jill charged was a hollow one, and he knew it. She was right, the optics would be a disaster. The narrative would not be unstable stepmother assaults CEO, but rather CEO provokes maternal fury. He could already see the headlines, the whispers at the club, the knowing looks. He poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it felt like a physical entity trapped inside his chest. He had intended to isolate Billy and put Jill in her place, a clean surgical strike. Instead he had unleashed a feral, unpredictable force. Jill was no longer just a business rival. She was a wounded, vengeful mother, and he had just profoundly underestimated the lengths to which she would go. His mind began to race, shifting from offense to damage control. He would have to fortify his position, ensure his fabricated evidence against Billy was airtight, and preemptively spin the story to key players like his sister, Ashley, and the rest of the board. He had to make them believe that Jill's violence was proof of her and Billy's inherent unsuitability, the final dramatic unraveling that validated all his suspicions. The game had become infinitely more dangerous, and the stakes had been raised to a terrifying new level. Meanwhile Jill, storming through the polished corridors of Jabot, was a vortex of conflicting emotions. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, making her fingers tingle and her heart pound a fierce, wild rhythm against her ribs. The physical sensation of her hand connecting with Jack's face was imprinted on her palm, a brand of her defiance. There was a savage, primal satisfaction in it, a catharsis after years of swallowing her pride and biting her tongue in the name of family harmony and corporate ambition. But beneath that satisfying burn, cold, hard fear began to uncoil in her stomach. What had she done? She had given Jack a powerful weapon. She had acted on pure emotion, and in the world of the Abbotts, emotion was a liability to be exploited. She needed to find Billy. She needed to get to him before Jack could, to look her son in the eye and hear from him, without a shadow of a doubt, that these accusations were lies. She fumbled for her phone, her movements jerky, and typed out a frantic text demanding he meet her at the ranch immediately, that it was an emergency. Her mind was already constructing defenses, planning counterattacks. She would need allies. She thought of Lily, Billy's ex-wife and business partner, who knew his heart better than anyone. She thought of Tracy, the kind-hearted Abbott sister who might see through Jack's deceptions. This would be a war fought on multiple fronts, in the boardroom, in the media, and within the fragile ecosystem of the family itself. She reached her car, slamming the door shut and leaning her head back against the rest, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The image of Jack's shocked, reddened face flashed behind her eyelids. A small, grim smile touched her lips. Let him be shocked. Let him be afraid. He had chosen this battle, and he had no idea the storm he had just summoned. The confrontation, when it inevitably came with Billy, was every bit as painful and chaotic as Jill had feared. She found him at the ranch, his demeanor a mixture of confusion and defensive irritation. When she poured out the story, her voice cracking with a mixture of fury and maternal protectiveness, detailing the 3 secrets Jack had framed him for, Billy's face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions: disbelief, dawning horror, and then a familiar self-destructive rage. But it wasn't directed at Jack, not at first. It was directed at her. You hit him, Billy exclaimed, his voice rising in pitch. Mom, are you insane? What were you thinking? That doesn't help anything. That just makes me look guiltier. It makes you look unstable. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a caged animal. God, he's going to use this against us. He's going to use this to prove his whole point that we're the unstable, chaotic branch of the family. Jill stood her ground, her heart breaking at his reaction. She had expected gratitude, or at least solidarity, but instead she was faced with the bitter reality that her violent defense had only complicated his predicament. He was destroying you, Billy, she shot back, her voice raw. He was sitting there, so smug, so sure of himself, laying out this elaborate lie designed to make you the villain. What was I supposed to do? Thank him? Offer him a brandy? The argument that ensued was brutal, a painful tangle of love, frustration, and years of shared history. Billy, haunted by his own past mistakes, was terrified that this would be the final nail in his coffin, the one failure from which he could not recover. Jill was terrified that in trying to save him, she had inadvertently handed Jack the rope to hang him with. It was in the midst of this heated exchange that the true insidious genius of Jack's frame-up became apparent. One of the secrets, the leaked health information about John Abbott, had a grain of truth to it. Billy, in a moment of profound weakness and drunken despair months ago, had indeed mentioned it to someone he shouldn't have. He hadn't done it with malice, and he had been consumed with guilt ever since, but the fact remained that the foundation of Jack's lie was built upon a tiny, shameful fragment of reality. When Billy, cornered and frantic, finally admitted this to his mother, the air went out of the room. Jill stared at him, the world tilting on its axis. It wasn't a full confession to Jack's charges, but it was a chink in their armor, a vulnerability that Jack, in his diabolical cleverness, had somehow unearthed and exploited. The fight left Billy's body, replaced by a slumped, defeated posture. See, he whispered, his eyes filled with a hopeless shame. I'm my own worst enemy. He didn't have to frame me for everything. He just had to know I was capable of one piece of it, and he could build the rest of the prison around me. In that moment, Jill's rage transformed. It was no longer a hot, impulsive fire, but a cold, determined ice. She walked over to her son, cupped his face in her hands, the same hands that had struck Jack just hours before, and made him look at her. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low and intense, devoid of all hysteria. "A moment of weakness does not define you. A mistake you made in the dark does not give him the right to paint you as a monster in the light. He has taken your shame and weaponized it. That is unforgivable. We are not going to let him win this. We are going to fight him on every single front, and we are going to prove that he is the liar." The maternal fury was now fully fused with a strategic, calculating resolve. The slap had been the opening act. The real battle was just beginning. The ripple effects continued to spread. The story, as these things always do in Genoa City, began to leak out in distorted fragments. A whispered account from an executive who heard raised voices, a rumor from a security guard about a tense exit, the visible mark on Jack's cheek that he tried and failed to conceal at a meeting the next day. The corporate world began to choose sides. Allies of Jack, like the ever-opportunistic Michael Baldwin, began quietly building a legal and professional case against Billy, seeing a chance to cement their own power by aligning with the apparent victor. Others, those who had always been wary of Jack's arrogance or who held a soft spot for the underdog struggle of Billy and Jill, like Christine Williams, felt a stirring of doubt and sympathy. The family itself was thrown into turmoil. Ashley Abbott, caught between her two brothers, was torn. Her logical mind told her to trust Jack's evidence, his position, his history of leadership. But her heart, and her own complicated history with family betrayals, made her question the narrative. She saw the fervent, desperate light in Jill's eyes and remembered the many times Billy had been unfairly maligned in the past. Tracy Abbott, the family's moral compass, was horrified by the entire situation, the slap merely a symptom of a much deeper sickness within the family she loved. She began her own quiet investigation, seeking the truth not for victory, but for healing, though healing seemed a distant, almost impossible dream. The conflict became the central, defining drama of their lives, coloring every interaction, every business decision, every family dinner.